perfect. So welcome to the June 23rd, 2022 special meeting of the Council on Developmental Services. This was rescheduled from last week. Thank you to the council for that accommodation. I know that several members of the commission had sons and daughters graduating from high school, so I appreciate the flexibility in the council members to reschedule to tonight. I'll call the meeting together at 4:36 p.m. My name is Kevin Zingler. I'm the chair of the council. Welcome everyone for joining us. We do have a quorum, and this meeting, just as a reminder, will be recorded and be available for public record. So please, when you state your, when you have any business before the council, please state your name for the record so that anyone listening to this video or listening to this via audio can understand who's talking at any point in the meeting. First item on our agenda is call the meeting to order and introductions. I believe we've already done that. We do have a guest joining us. I don't know, Commissioner, if you want to acknowledge Elise. Lisa is with us, Deputy Commissioner. She's the first time that she's attended our council meeting. So welcome, Elisa.
Yeah, Elisa is joining us tonight. She was queued up in the event that we couldn't postpone last week's meeting to cover for me because I wasn't going to be able to attend. But I'm glad she's joining tonight. Peter, when he was in the role, filled in or covered for me on occasion. Many of you know her as the former regional director in the North. She's come off camera, so I'll let her finish her own introduction, but I am very happy to have her aboard as my deputy. She hit the ground running, and I couldn't be happier about the team we've assembled despite the retirement. So, Elisa.
Hello, everyone. As the commissioner said, I'm Elisa Velardo. Very happy to be joining as a guest today and listen to the work of the council. And I have interacted with many of you in my tenure at DDS, and it's good to see everyone this evening.
Excellent. Welcome. This is Kevin Zingler, chair of the council. Welcome. And also, we also have another guest with us who will be with us for in the short term, Rod O'Connor. So Rod, welcome back. And I believe you're retiring, but you're coming back. So congratulations on behalf of the council for all your advocacy efforts and legislative efforts over the years. And we love having you at our meetings. So welcome back. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Second item on our agenda is a moment of silence for individuals impacted by COVID-19. If we could please have a moment to recognize those individuals who we've lost and also those individuals who are battling COVID-19. Thank you. Next item on our agenda is public participation. Would any members of the public wish to address the council at this time? You would have 3 minutes to address the council. Any members of the public wish to speak? Once again, any members of the public wish to address the council? Seeing none, I'll close that opportunity for public comment and I'll move on to the next item on our agenda. Next item is review and approval of the previous council meeting minutes. So you did get minutes of the May 19th, 2022 meeting minutes. Is there any additions, corrections? Otherwise, I entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll make a motion to approve.
All right, the motion has been made by Pam, seconded by Adrian. Is there, so there's a motion on the floor. Any further discussion on the minutes as presented? Seeing none, I'll call a vote of the council. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 All right, chair votes aye and it's unanimously passed. Thank you. Moving on to the commissioner's report. Commissioner Sheff, welcome and thank you for attending.
Thank you, Jordan Sheff, DDS. So just to begin with a couple of personal points of privilege here. Yes, Rod has returned to us and I appreciate him pinch hitting tonight in particular to help with minute taking. Joe, I think, had shared previously that he and his partner were expecting a child and they had a baby last week, I think, a little baby girl. She's beautiful. And mom and dad and baby are all doing great. And he is on a paternity leave up to 12 weeks unless Heather decides to kick him out sooner. which in my experience may just be the case. So we'll see. And in the interim, we have some coverage plans to assist me. So Rod is back and Joe is out. So I'll begin tonight's report just to share some information. We are continuing to see and face retirements, and we have needed to make some appointments or promotions within the department for some key roles. So for those of you, just I'll recap everything, even though some of this is a little older and not new. Some of these things won't take effect until July 1. But Eugene Harvey, the Southbury long-term Southbury director, has retired. He is back on a TWR. Kathy Hanowitz has agreed to take on the role of director at Southbury. It's a role within my appointing authority. Kathy's been there almost as long as Eugene was there, although I think she'd hate to admit that, and becomes the first ever female director at Southbury. So in the spirit of our Lieutenant Governor's initiative around advancing women and children's, women and girls, it's nice to be able to do that in a slightly different, a different face and maybe a different flavor. But those of you who know her, and Diana certainly does, she's tremendous. She's part of the family out there, and she'll do a great job. In the West, staying west, Fritz Gorst, who had a very long and storied career at DDS in Massachusetts and came to us a number of years ago, has decided to retire from Connecticut State Service now. He will be coming back to assist there. Shannon O'Brien, who had been the private assistant regional director for a number of years, with prior experience as an acting RD in other regions, and covering for Fritz on 2 different leaves of absence, is going to assume the helm there, and she'll have some work to do to fill her prior role as ARD come July 1st, and we're very happy about that. Thomas Daly retired April 1st. He came back to assist in the South region as regional director. I've transferred Cress from his role as Cress Seccaroli from his role as regional director of public statewide to the South region. He had acted when I moved from the North region to central office. He was the acting regional director. He's held a variety of positions in a variety of divisions, and was well suited to continue the stable operations of the South region. And Patricia West, who was the assistant regional director in public, has become the regional director for public beginning July 1. And I think that you're already familiar with the fact that Stacy Silva Gordon, who was the private ARD under Elisa in the North region, is now the regional director in the North. That appointment was made at the time, on or about April 1st, when Elisa came to central office. And I think that's the bulk of those appointments you ought to know about. So a lot of transition, and to be quite candid, those are opportunities that don't come by that often, and in a different time we might have looked at a more competitive process, but to post them externally. But our experience is that's a 3 to 6 month process to bring someone on board, and for the purposes of stability, with so many staff leaving the department, I chose to use the appointing authority of the governor through me to fill those roles, and knowing that we have full confidence in the competence of staff that where we made those appointments. They have stellar reputations and are appreciated by all of their constituents, or at least most of their constituents most of the time. Aside from that, we continue to work on the ARPA initiatives. We have begun the process of bringing stakeholders to the table to assist with the rollout of those endeavors. And I think I think Elisa and I, in talking, felt that it would be better to give an update still at a high level, but we'll have a better handle on what, there wasn't much to share based on what we've already shared with you. but maybe in July would be an opportune time to talk a little bit more about where we are in those ARPA initiatives. A lot of the rest of my work in the last month has been focused on workforce development, both in the private sector as well as in the need we have in public, and trying to desperately fill roles and help providers fill roles at those key frontline positions, direct care, nursing, LPN, and it's a real struggle. It's a real struggle right now. We have heard from a few of the private providers that some of the money we've infused has begun to turn the tide, or at least it hasn't gotten worse in the last 6 to 8 weeks, and hopefully things will start to get even better. And we had a little bit better luck more recently in public than we have had in prior months in terms of recruitment. To give some idea of the challenges common to both the private and public sector, posting many jobs, taking applicants, setting up interviews. If you're lucky enough to have those individuals show up for interviews and be qualified, they then have to accept the offer. And we've had people both in public and private accept offers and only stick around for a very short time. And so there's a sense of futility, I think, shared by everyone in management, both in public and private, that we hope to overcome in short order. And hopefully we'll start to see more people coming into service, into staffing at the front level in the days and weeks to come. But that is where a lot of my effort has been spent, in conversations with Department of Labor, in working with Department of Administrative Services, which now houses the human resource component for state services, and the Governor's Workforce Council. In addition to anywhere else anyone will lend me an ear, I'm happy to talk about the crisis and concerns. And that's largely how the last month has gone. And very quickly, I wanted to make sure I saved adequate time. Last month, we from a prior meeting, there were a list of questions submitted to me. I responded in writing to them around abuse and neglect investigation process. I responded to them in writing prior to last month's meeting, but with not a lot of time for folks to read through a long list of questions with a long list of responses. And I wanted to make sure that if there were concerns or questions about those answers, that we had time to talk about them today, if there were any. And then if not, I can be done. Before we do that, because I'll lose sight of this, I did attend, as you're all aware, I am an active member in the National Association of State Directors on Developmental Disabilities. Because my friend Mark left as president, the vice president got elevated to president, and as secretary treasurer, I got elevated to vice president. And I had the opportunity last week to join with my colleagues from around the country in what's one of the more valuable afternoons for me twice a year in what we call a directors forum, where we really get to commiserate over what's going on. And I know you hear this from me often, but I want to reaffirm that most, if not all, of the challenges that we face in Connecticut are felt in part or in full by my colleagues all across the country. We're actually, despite the horrors that I know Shannon's talked about it in her reports as an ombudsman person, despite the horrors of the staffing crisis here, it's better here than it is in other places, which is really hard for me to wrap my brain around. Mm-hmm. My colleague in Kentucky, where things have gotten a little bit better for her lately, they're continuing to pay the federal minimum wage or maybe a little bit better for direct care workers. So $7.50, $7.75, sometimes they get all the way to $8. The cost of living in Kentucky, I imagine, is quite different than Connecticut, but I still think, I don't think the price of gas is vastly different. I don't think rent's incredibly cheap. So I don't know how they're doing it, but they are. So whether it's the workforce crisis, whether it's the challenge of individuals with complex needs having meaningful days, whether it's issues around meaningful employment, whether it's the issue of trying to expand the range of offerings in residential services. We sit and we talk about all of those things together, and there's some value for me in that social comparison model, where I feel a little bit better about how I'm feeling about my job. And then when we get recognition about how well we're doing compared to other states, at times that feels good, but I also know not to rest on our laurels, that we need to keep pushing the needle. We're joined by states like Louisiana and Tennessee, Oregon, Washington, California, and others who I don't want to miss anybody. There's some really nice stuff going on across the country in attempts to improve systems, and we try to learn from each other. So I had a very valuable afternoon with them last week, as well as some other conference trainings I was able to attend while virtually while we participated. So that was a week out of my last month, which is why it felt like such a short month. And now I'd like to turn it over to questions specific to the abuse and neglect or any other areas. I know sometimes other things have come up, and council persons would like to take the opportunity to pose a question to me. So with that, Kevin, I'll pause and let you direct traffic.
Great. Are there any, this is Kevin Zingler, Chair of the Council. Are there any questions for the Commissioner for his report? And then I know that there was a Rick Rothstein had sent us an email that, you know, he was wanted to get more information about abuse and neglect. And unfortunately, he could not be here tonight. So I don't know if we want to kick the can or kick the topic to the next meeting, if folks, or if we wanted to have, I know he wanted to be part of the discussion. So what is the pleasure of the council?
Am I don't know if I'm muted.
Adrian, go ahead. Yeah.
Adrian Benjamin, council member. I did talk to Rick, and he's going through a different kind of experience than what I went through with his child suffering some abuse. But the same part of it, the report's already way behind when it was supposed to be done, and no real explanation for the delay. It's not done yet, even though the incident was mid-March. I guess I would like to talk about this. We can certainly wait till next month. I just resent out Jordan's report last night because I realized I had forgotten about it, actually. So I found it and reread it. And I noticed that in Shannon's ombudsman report, there was a couple of issues about abuse and neglect. I don't know what they are, but I was curious because I'm really hoping we can come up with some better approaches than the current approaches. Not that that's an easy thing to change, but that's my hope. So I don't know if other people want to talk about specifics or if we want to just wait.
Other thoughts from the council? This is Kevin Zingler, sorry. Do we want to postpone the discussion? Do we want to have, if maybe a subgroup of us wants to meet with the commissioner at some point, that might be appropriate, so that way Adrian and Rick can be involved in that process. And if other council members want to join in that Teams call, Zoom call, or maybe a physical meeting, whatever, would that be an appropriate approach to this? I know the commissioner answered our questions that we as a council formulated. If there's other next steps, maybe that would be a good use of time instead of using up the council's time tonight or next meeting. I'm open to either suggestion.
Well, I guess one thought I had is I don't want Adrienne leaving this meeting feeling frustrated. So if there's something that she'd like to discuss, I'm open to staying on and talking about it, because I can only imagine, having something like this is just hanging over you is pretty frustrating.
Thanks, Pam. That's nice.
Other thoughts from the council?
Patty.
I see Patty.
Yeah, council member. I'm happy to stay after too. I also want to be sensitive to Rick because I know he, definitely would want to be a part of the conversation as well too. So, whatever works.
Well,
So I'm going to offer this. Abuse and neglect is a topic. Was a topic for when I met with state directors last week. It's a topic that's always present in our minds as advocates, family members, and staff, as leaders. So I don't think there's any harm in talking about it twice. And Kevin, to your Kevin Zingler, to your point, I think a separate meeting from our council meeting for those who would really like to talk about some of the issues would also that we. It's not an either or; it can be both, a both and. So I would just suggest that.
Sure. So why don't we do that? Why don't we take a couple minutes? We need to just be cognizant that this is Kevin Zingler again, sorry. This meeting is being recorded, and any personal information should be not part of the conversation. It should be the 50,000-foot view of the conversation about processes and structure. And if there's further discussion, I think as the commissioner indicated, he'd be happy to meet with folks, and we can continue the discussion next month if needed. So is that agreeable by the council?
Sure.
All right, perfect. So Adrian,
Yes.
I know that you have your hand up. I see Patty, I don't know if that's a legacy hand, it might be.
Yeah.
The legacy, okay. So I'll turn the floor over to Adrian if you want to kick off the conversation, and then we can go from there.
Well, first, I really appreciate you all's interest and concern. And obviously, we all care about not only our kids, but the kids we serve, that are served by DDS. And I appreciate Jordan going through the long process of answering lots of detailed technical questions. I guess I'm still stuck about the issue of agencies investigating themselves. And I know that I saw in Jordan's answer number 3 that nursing homes do the same thing. It's like, well, if you talk to people that have family members in nursing homes, they're not very happy about that either. And most of our agencies are not enormous with thousands of staff and thousands of employees. So I think it's very likely that the person who does some investigating, the investigating team, probably knows the people they're investigating. These people, they're all in the same agency and they have relationships, whether it's at the annual meeting or at, it's not unbiased. It's not a clear, clean thing like you're walking into the room with a new person who you have no contact with. So I think the investigating itself thing is just really problematical. And I was really impressed when Kevin mentioned a few months ago that he usually hires, or maybe always hires, a third-party investigating firm. Now, I recognize you're paying that firm, so maybe we could say that's not 100% devoid of bias, but at least it's not someone who bumps into each other in the elevator, So that's an issue that I'm still not comfortable with. And
So why don't we pause there?
okay.
I think that's a pretty meaty topic, and I think that's a topic we can do a deeper dive on. But for the benefit of the public who may be looking to watch this, or I don't think we're live. I think we're just recording. I think it's worth talking about a little. We cited nursing homes. It happens in hospitals. It happens in consumer electronics. It happens, in a world where there's regulatory bodies and oversight. Private entities often internally investigate themselves. Likewise, police departments have internal investigation units. I don't think that it is solely a DDS issue. I think the history of it is interesting and is important. And for those who may be watching, there was a time where most of the services, there was a time where all of the services were provided by the state. And in time that we began to go from public to private. And we used to have a lot more investigators internally at DDS. But as we shrunk our footprint in terms of services we were offering, we also shrunk that investigation, the investigator pool. 95% of, or 90 to 95% of all services in the state are provided in the private sector. When the decision was made by a prior administration to include private providers in doing their own investigations while reserving the right to take jurisdiction and to always have overview and approval of that investigatory process and provide the training for that investigatory process. It was a change in the culture and the way things were done. But I think it's also important to note there are a lot of investigations that occur that are minor in comparison to some of the other investigations, and there'd be a load on resources. So it isn't that we couldn't go back to doing that. We need to build a small army to handle that, and to go out and conduct those investigations. And we still find that the substantiation rate is roughly the same of around 50%, whether we're doing the investigation, whether it's the list of PIs, or whether it's the agencies investigating themselves. The substantiation rate, meaning we reach a conclusion where we can reach a burden of proof against an individual or an agency that supports a claim of abuse and neglect. So, you know, I want to frame that. It's a pretty meaty discussion. And I will tell you that even when we do investigations, when we take jurisdiction and do investigations, that families are not always happy when we find those things to be unsubstantiated, whether we're doing them on public programs or whether we're conducting those investigations in the private sector. Our team of investigators is often faced with criticism for not being able to substantiate or reach outcomes that families are seeking. So I think that can be a large part of when we meet to have sort of a working group discussion. But I didn't know if, you know, and frequently I ask Pam and Kevin to not wear their private provider hats, but I don't know if they have thoughts or insight from a provider perspective as to how that ought to be done and what that means. So I'd love to hear from them if they wish to share.
Well, I started my career, of course, it was probably 25 years ago. I worked with P&A as an abuse investigator. So I have a little bit of a background, and I find, you know, when we feel the allegation is serious, we outsource it so that we're confident that we have an independent assessment of what happened. I will tell you that it's very expensive for a small nonprofit, and if we had to do it every time we had to do an investigation, we wouldn't be able to provide services under, you know, for DDS. That being said, I think my recommendation would also be for some training for executive directors, because I kick back a number of the reports that I get. So I'll ask additional questions, or if I'm not comfortable. I will also say we had a situation once where we substantiated abuse, and then we ran into a problem with CHRO because we terminated the person. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. I kind of went a little ballistic on CHRO, and it's probably the first time they ever threw out a case right from the beginning. But it was a problem because, you know, that's something that we probably should talk about. But anyway, I think, you know, it's frustrating. It's frustrating because, you know, it's very time consuming, even when you do it internally. I think some people I've gotten a sense, you know, having been doing this for a number of years, of who I feel is able to do it objectively and who is not as strong, because they tend to be a little more biased because they know the staff. And so, you know, we've removed them. But I think, you know, maybe looking at a whole other level of training to those people that need to sign off on the reports would also be something that would be something to consider. I know that a number of our reports would have gone through if I didn't kick them back.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's but let's talk about the word substantiated, because I'll be vague, but in my personal experience, because the abuser, whoever committed an abusive thing against my family member, they couldn't figure out who did it, fine. But because everything is unsubstantiated, it goes into the pile of nothing happened. But when you have pictures of bruises, that means something happened. When you have pictures of bruises that occurred 3 weeks apart, that are obviously finger and handprint bruises, something happened. So even though they can't substantiate who and when, the incident that something happened twice, I believe should be substantiated. Maybe there's a better word than that. I don't know.
Yeah, so I think, and Adrian and I have had some communication around this. And I think it is a matter, the syntax, the words that we use, and we can talk about what words we might change. We use the word unsubstantiated to mean that there was not enough evidence to prove that an individual perpetrated abuse and neglect. That doesn't mean that an injury didn't occur. That doesn't mean that a bruise or a trip or a fall, a theft, emotional harm, that doesn't mean that those things didn't occur. It just means that the case isn't supported with enough evidence to substantiate the claim of abuse and neglect against the perpetrator. I'm not sure how we say that differently, and I'd be happy to talk more about that maybe when we have that work group meeting. But I want to also mention that even when we have unsubstantiated outcomes in terms of supporting an abuse and neglect claim, often investigators will still make recommendations about things that should be considered. So they might say the case was not substantiated, but a review of what we call PMT, physical management techniques, or a review of behavioral support plans, or a review of agency training on signs and symptoms. Very often the investigator will unsubstantiate an investigation and still make recommendations. And there are multiple levels, as Pam was saying, she kicks them back. Depending on your organization, different levels of authority may review that, and have an opportunity to also provide recommendations. So that is included in the process. And I don't want to get into the case specifics. We agreed to not do that, but so there's still room for improvement. It isn't. There may be instances where it's simply disregarded as not a real thing. It gets set aside and it gets no attention. But we also track recommendations. DDS tracks recommendations and on those investigations to ensure that if there's a recommendation that the executive director or the public director agrees to, that there's follow through to make sure that those things occur.
This is Kevin Zingler. That's my experience too with, I agree with Pam. In terms of process, we look at it as, how there's different severities of abuse and neglect and allegations, and you have to, it's true, it's very expensive to investigate these. My preference is to always have an outside investigator, but there are some times where because of staffing, we need to bring someone in, and we do have investigators on staff who are trained. We also make sure that they are not in the same department. They're, arm's length transactions, if you will. But if there's anything with sexual abuse, physical abuse, something that's very severe, I will bring an outside investigator without a heartbeat. I mean, that's just we have a zero tolerance for that, any type of activity. So that's how we operate. And we have kickback investigations, and I'm glad that Commissioner Sheff noted that even if something is unsubstantiated, I find it very valuable to get feedback from an outside person, an outside investigator who does this for a living, to say, hey, you need to really tighten your policies on this, or you need to review this with your staff, or there needs to be some retraining done. So I think that's very helpful to us as an organization, and I find that very valuable. So I think we keep getting more and more vigilant against abuse and neglect, and that's something that we do as an organization. We also teach abuse and neglect. We're required to do it once a year by DDS policy. We do it twice a year because we think it's so very valuable to remind people that we are stalwarts of our people. We are people that, there's a trust factor there, and trust is very hard to earn. And it's we want to make sure that we keep that trust. So we do it twice a year. That's something that we've made a cognizant policy in terms of our agency. We think it's very valuable to that, and that's something that we do. But I do think that the process, from an outsider investigation, I've had discussions with some of the investigators we use, and literally, just for your information, I hand off the paperwork to them, and that's it. If they need documentation records, they go to my quality assurance department. I don't get involved with it. I want to make sure that our staff and our person served and the family has an unbiased, fair process. And at the end of the day, everyone walks away saying that I got a fair shake on this. So that's how we operate. And that's how we are successful in terms of handling these cases. So that's, but I do see your point, Adrian, that it could be very toxic if you had someone, a conflict of interest, where someone was investigating another staff member and they sit at the same lunch table, or they are in the same bowling league or whatever. Obviously, if that happened, we first make sure there's no connection that way either. We always make sure you know the person who is being the allegation is against. Do you hang out with them, that type of deal? But 90% of the time I try to go outside, but it is very expensive. And I will let very expensive. Once that clock is, the meter's going, the meter's going. So and sometimes, sometimes some abuse and neglect allegations are, how do I put this, staff tit for tats, if you will. And that, I think, is to Pam's point, that if we were to hire an outside investigator for, we know something that is it's on camera and we have evidence and it's black and white, cut and dry, that's very expensive just to have an investigator come in and sort of reinforce that was, we get the footage and here's a report, that type of deal. So we do manage it internally as best as we can. And as I said, my preference is to always use an outside investigator just to make sure everything's fair and unbiased for both the protection of the agency and the individual served. One of the things that has always irked me about the investigation process, or the registry process, and I think I've said this before, I think, Rod, you were on the council with us, or taking minutes back in the day. I've actually had conversations with my legislative delegation. It's unfair that we can terminate someone, a staff member who has been substantiated for abuse and neglect, and they are put on the registry by the commissioner, and they still collect unemployment. So we reward them by sitting at home and collecting unemployment. I think that's very wrong as a state of Connecticut. And we've paid money in the past for no reason, for bad apples, if you will, in the orchard. And that's something I think the Department of Labor needs to take a look at. These individuals are not allowed to work in our organization. We terminate them for that reason and that sole reason, yet they can still collect unemployment because they won an unemployment case, because somehow we shouldn't have terminated, but we were told to terminate them. And that has always gotten me.
Complaint.
Yep, and CHRO too. Yep.
That's huge.
So I want to. I see. I'm sorry. I just want to interrupt. I see Christine's hand up. I appreciate where you're headed with that, Kevin. I want to sort of come back to the expense part of it. There's an expense no matter where it lies, whether it's DDS paying an expense, the provider paying an expense to an outside agency. But even when providers are asked to conduct investigations within their own organization, there's an expense for that. You're pulling a staff person from other responsibilities. And so that expense may be a delay in a good outcome for somebody. That may mean paying overtime to direct care while a manager is being pulled to do an investigation or things like that. So there is always an expense. It's just a matter of where that expense lies and who's getting paid to do the investigation. So expense isn't the only part of it. That's certainly not a deciding factor. I wanted to recognize, if I can, Kevin, Christine.
Yeah, definitely. Go ahead, Christine.
Hi, Christine Heinzer-Strauss. I just wanted to quickly say, first of all, I appreciate what Kevin and Pam shared, because that is helpful to know. But also, I do think generally self-investigation is not a good idea. But one of the things I'm wondering about, and I don't know how you go about achieving it, but it could be some brainstorming required, is to try and, whether this is good, this is not good in nursing homes either. And there is kind of a sense of complacency that takes place when you do a job routinely over and over and over again. And I don't know if there's a way to try and change some of the complacency out of the culture. I see it in every aspect, including my own care of my kids, as well as in, public care, as well as in group supported employment, or whatever it is. I think that there is sometimes people just get way too comfortable in their positions. And I don't know if there's a way to stop and rethink that. Also, could there potentially be, this is a can of worms, of course, but a pool of money put aside per year to help agencies pay for private investigations when it's a substantiated claim?
Agencies are free to do that currently, and we provide them a list. They can choose to do that, as Pam and Kevin have indicated they have done, use these outside investigator firms, which are qualified by us. They just don't call any PI in the yellow pages. We request that they use one specifically that's been through our training. So that's available, and because of the way our rates are constructed, in theory, that money is already part of what they do, whether it's to do their own investigations or to pay for an outside. I understand we could increase that amount within the agency budgets, may be one way to look at doing that, but I don't know. I would need an actuary or someone smarter than numbers than me to figure out what that would be and how we would infuse it. If you have an agency that has very few investigations, should they get it, as well as agencies who have a lot of investigations? So for instance, some of our agencies who cater to a population that is more challenged behaviorally than others tends to have a higher amount of injuries of unknown origin, which often lead to investigations. It isn't because they're necessarily rife with abuse. There's just more opportunities for outcomes that are questionable because of the people they support. And I think some of you moms and dads can sort of understand a little bit about what I'm talking about when I say that. But should they get more money than an agent? I don't know how we do that. And again, we don't need to figure that out tonight. But I think that's another thing to think about, is how and where you infuse those dollars. Is it per agency? Is it per service hour? Those are all those things that we would need someone smarter than me to figure out.
Any other questions from council? Or Adrian, go ahead.
Well, just the other thing to throw out there is something for all of us to think about is the timeline. The DDS policy is 60 days for the agency to investigate itself, and the DDS has another 30 days to review the investigation. So that's 3 months. Now, what happens when the investigation actually takes 6 months for one and 7 months for another, which was my experience? What's the accountability? What's the consequence for taking it twice as long? One consequence is the people that might have been able to answer some questions didn't even work there anymore. Why 60 and 90 days? Where did those numbers come from? And I understand ICF have the 5-day thing, which also seems impossible. And but what about 15 days or 30 days instead of this long period of time when you're trying to look into something that happened and then people leave or they don't remember? And when you only have to investigate or meet with 10 people or 12 people to find out what might have happened on a Thursday night, why does that take 3 months, 6 months, 7 months?
So I don't think things should take 7 months. But I will tell you that I believe when I got to central office, or when I got to DDS 10 years ago, we used to give providers 90 days, and then we still took 30 days, and I shrunk that, or we at DDS. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's always been 60, but I thought that we had reduced that because I didn't understand the discrepancy between, and I don't understand why there's some expectation for 5. I don't fully understand why within ICFs it's a 5-day turnaround. And there are times where investigations you simply can't do it that fast. There's so many people to interview. There's so much evidence to gather, and there's other competing priorities going on. The incident's already gone by. But there was a time where where prior to the pandemic, there were agencies who were always lagging so hard that we made them sub them out because they were not able to ever complete them on time. We took a slightly different posture over the last couple of years because there was so much that was impossible during the pandemic that you couldn't be in the same room. You didn't want to cross-contaminate. The staff who were now off duty were at home, didn't have access to electronics to be interviewed. Did you really want to bring them into a room and sit 3 feet across for them? And there were all those considerations during the pandemic. Kendris has tried to push, now that we're moving towards the endemic phase, I hope, to push providers back within those timelines. And now the workforce crisis is impacting the ability to get them done timely. But I agree. I think that's a long. I think 60 days can be a long time. Is a long time, and try and do them faster. But I haven't operated a private provider in 10 years. We tried to get them done in 60 days. Unless they were particularly ornery, we were often successful, but sometimes it just took a little longer. And I don't know if others want to comment on that time frame piece.
Kevin?
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah, no, this is Kevin Zingler. I'd be happy to comment on that. My experience is that as soon as we get the intake, I call our private investigator, and usually within a week or 5 days, he is able to schedule interviews and get out there and interview people. Obviously, if it's severe, he will make accommodations to try to get out next day or the day after. But I will tell you that because of staffing shortages and because of other things that were the commissioner noted, sometimes things get rescheduled and it takes 2 to 3 weeks just to get all the interviews and get all the paperwork in and get everything connected. And then also, you know, if you think about it, he has a workload too, or she has a workload as an investigator as well. So they already have some irons in the fire that they're already working on. So there is a list of investigators that we received from DDS. I can tell you that's a page and a half of investigators. So it's not like there's thousands and thousands of police departments or investigators available to us. Maybe that's part of the conversation too, is how do we get more people involved or more resources. I actually had a case 2 weeks ago, and talking to our investigator we go for outsourcing, he was working on 5 other cases and he said, I'll get to you next week. So that's how sometimes the staffing crunch and the COVID crunch and just being busy happens. What we normally do is we pull the person off shift immediately, so that there is no more further interaction. If possible, we reassign that person to another section within our organization, but they have to work with another individual. They can't be left alone because of the staffing issues, so that way we're not just pulling a resource off totally and having overtime and all these other things happen. So we try to put a person where there's a 2 staff ratio, so that there's always a witness, if you will, while someone's being investigated. So we found that to be very helpful for not only the individual who is the alleged perpetrator, but also for our people served, so that there's a continuity of services, if you will. Obviously, if a severity of the case determines whether we put that person off shift completely. I mean, we've done that too. So if it's egregious, sexual, physical, we know that there is something, we will pull them off shift and they will sit at home until the investigation is over. But that's pretty much how that works. So it's a process, and I think maybe we need to take a look at how many investigators we have in the state who's qualified. It's just like the nursing services here in the state of Connecticut. There's only a handful of nursing services if you contract out. So maybe that's something we need to figure out how to build that pipeline for those additional resources. And I'll yield the floor to other comments.
Well, I'll tell you, when we have to, because we're a day program, fortunately, we don't have as many, but we do have them. But because we're individualized, when we get an allegation, I immediately have to put the person, on leave. And when I have to pay somebody that's not working, I expedite that, the investigation, because there's nothing that irritates me more than having to pay somebody when there's a pending allegation for them to sit home, particularly in the summer. And I make sure that investigation happens quickly, because then I also have to pay a second person to do their job. And that's where, these investigations get expensive, because we have to have 2 people to work with one individual. Plus then I have to, release somebody to do an investigation. I do think that suggestion I would have, though, would be to really look at whatever leadership is signing off on the investigations. We're not mandated to have any training or background. I'm not so sure I would be as discerning about them when I'm reading them if I didn't have a background in it. And so, and I'm not, I don't know what other agencies, what their background is, if they're just sort of deferring to their internal investigator. I tend to be really challenge every investigation that comes across my desk.
So I know there's a couple hands up still. It's 5:26. We're going to lose a quorum at 5:50, I think I heard. So, and there's still an ombudsperson's report and maybe other business. We agreed to get together in the next month to have more conversation offline about this. But I hate to cut Christine and Patty short, but if maybe their comments can be relatively brief. I'm planning to exit the meeting shortly. But I recognize and I know this is important, and I'm doing my, I don't want to be dismissive of the topic. I think it's important we continue to talk about. So if we maybe, Kevin, we can take the last 2 questions and then move to the rest of the agenda may be helpful.
Sounds like a plan. Patty, you're up.
Hi. At Summer Games a couple weekends ago, I ran into Siobhan Morgan. She used to work for DDS and now she is with Disability Rights Connecticut, which you guys probably know, Kevin, Pam, and of course Jordan. They're the organization that took over for OPA, which I never knew. So that was, something new that I learned. But my understanding from some of the information that I picked up at the table there was that they also do investigations. Have you had any experience with them, doing investigations? Yes.
So I'm going to be very careful on a recorded meeting how I phrase this. My experience thus far with their current leadership is they look for more broader issues and less individual specific issues in which they are investing their investigatory time. If they're doing other investigations on an individual basis, to my knowledge, they haven't assumed jurisdiction for any DDS specific individual investigations. But I would say that's not germane to their current leadership, as I don't remember under the 2 leaders prior to the last time I remember OPA asserting their jurisdictional authority to investigate on an individual specific basis. Jim McGahey was there, and there have been 2 executive directors between Jim and Deb, and so I don't know, and perhaps it's just Deb's still relatively new. Maybe that will come in time, but so I don't know. But I'm not aware of them. I know they have the right. And whether or not they're choosing to or not is a decision made by them. And that's what I know, Patty.
Okay, because from what Siobhan said, she has the authority and the training to walk right into a group home and start an investigation. So I'm just, putting that out there because I'd like to learn more about that. Maybe, is that something that I
think you should reach out to Disability Rights Connecticut and talk to them all you'd like.
I don't know, would it be appropriate for them to maybe talk to the council, or would that be a subcommittee thing, or I don't know, but it just seems like it would be interesting to know more.
They're an independent organization with federal designated responsibility, and I think if you would like to learn more about Disability Rights Connecticut, you can contact them directly.
Perhaps they could come and present at a meeting.
I don't know that would be a DD. I would have to investigate whether that would be an appropriate use of this meeting forum. They're an outside agency coming in to present. I don't know that. I don't know. I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm not certain that would be common or expected, but maybe it is. I'm unfamiliar with whether that would be an appropriate use of this time.
Christine, I saw you had your hand up, but I think you put it down. Are you good, or did you want to say a few words?
It was residual on that particular topic. I do have some things that I don't think were addressed in last month's meeting from Jordan, so I want to get to that before the end of no longer having a quorum.
Okay. Sorry, I had a cough there. So are there Are there any other questions for the commissioner before we move on to the ombudsperson's report?
It sounded like Christine wanted to ask George
Yeah.
some.
Yep.
I guess I should ask it now because we're under a time
Yep.
constraint. Sorry, Shannon. I
All
don't
right,
want
you
to
have
take
the floor.
your time. And I'm sorry, I'm watching children here. Well, I'm watching my children. Sorry. So, was there, I didn't see it addressed. I know we talked about Krista coming and talking about what the Social Security federal ceiling was, or lower limit, I guess, was being raised. But the state DSS services rate was lower for the asset limitation. I'm sorry, I've been up for 3 days, guys, so I'm sorry. But the asset limitation was lower still for the state for DSS and all funded things coming out of DSS for our population than the federal SSI asset limitation, which is being raised, or is in at least the federal process of being raised after since 1989. So did we ever have that conversation? I know I had to miss last meeting, but.
This is Kevin Zingler, Chair of the Council. We did not, but we will ask Krista, and maybe we can get her for our July meeting. Does that work for you, Christine?
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, let's see if that we'll put that under the topics for next meeting. Perfect. Follow up. I apologize if I dropped the ball on it. So, any other questions for the commissioner before we go to the ombudsperson's report?
Not for the commissioner. I was just wondering, do we need to actually vote on the citation before we lose a quorum? From what I understand, they take quite a while. So I didn't know if that was something that we should try to get done, or I don't know that we want to put it off another month.
Okay, so are we done with the commissioner's report? I think we are at this point. So thank you, Commissioner Chef, for joining us. I know that you have another engagement you have to get to, so good luck with that. And we will see you soon. So what I hear, I'm hearing Rod in my head. Is there a motion to suspend the rules so that we can move up item 4D on the agenda before the ombudsperson's report? And Shannon, are you okay with that? You have a time constraint before I do that? Okay, I see you're shaking your head. Is there such a motion to suspend the rules to take up topic 4E immediately by the council?
So moved.
Moved by Patty. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Adrian. Is there any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Chair votes aye, and we are on topic 4E, the Bo Dirty Bird. Wow, I'm gonna mess up here. Bo Dirty retirement citation, and I apologize. Trying to fight off a cough as I'm saying this too. So I want to thank Patty for providing the council with a draft citation. As you know, Mr. Dowdy is retiring after 40 years of service to the Special Olympics organization, godfather of Unified Sports, and has been a force and powerhouse in advancing Special Olympics and recreational opportunities for the individuals supported by the Department of DDS. So the council thought at our last meeting it would be appropriate to recommend through the governor a citation. So Patty has graciously researched and provided a draft language that could be forwarded over to the governor's office for consideration. And then I would assume we would want to present that back to him at either a council meeting or some kind of joint meeting with the governor, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's where we're at in this discussion. Is that correct? Is there any other points of view on this? So has everyone had a chance to take a look at the draft citation provided by Patty? And if so, is there any, obviously the governor will critique it too, but is there any further additions, deletions, or editing by the council before we have Kevin Bronson on our behalf approach the governor's office for a citation? Or a recommendation of a citation. We can't force the governor to give a citation out, but a recommendation that this gentleman get a citation. Kevin, I see you have your hand.
Yeah,
So Kevin Bronson, DDS. So I believe I sent the link. So what you have to with the I can't remember the group I sent the email to, but I can resend it again. The link to where you request the citation. But basically it's on the governor's website. It's not a citation, sorry, it's a proclamation. The governor's office is a proclamation. So and basically what you need to do is you need to fill out the form, and then once you fill the form out, let me know, and then that's when I can try to shepherd it along for you. But it does take a little while. Legislative stuff for the Senate or the House, those are citations, and you can request one, a joint citation from the Senate and the House as well. And you could probably use the same language as well.
Thank you. This is Kevin Zingler, Chair of the Council. Are there further discussion on the draft proclamation that has been presented? And I see Shannon, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to, this is Shannon Jacobino, the ombudsperson. I just want to make you aware that there is a word limit. So I don't know how long what you've written is, but there is a word limit if you submit it through the governor's website. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Okay, thank you. Is there further discussion on the suggested language? I believe it's clear and concise where I don't think we'd be in, I haven't gone to the governor's website, but I believe it's not, I've seen longer ones from the governor. So I think we're probably in good shape. All right, if there is no other discussion on this, I guess I would entertain a motion that we recommend that the council, and I'd be happy to submit on behalf of the council, that we submit the proposed proclamation text to the governor's office. And Kevin made a good point, Bronson, that we should also submit it to the House and the Senate for a joint citation. So I'm sure that there's other requests, but I think we should, as a council, at least put our make it known that we want to recommend this individual for these proclamations and citations. So is there a motion on the floor for you to authorize me to do that with the governor's office and also the House and the Senate leadership using the technical post? Moved by Adrian. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Patty. Is there any further discussion on this motion? All right. Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Chair votes aye and it passes unanimously. I will work on that in the next week or so. So we'll get that get it over to the governor's office and also the House leadership. So thank you. And thank you to Patty for your hard work and efforts in getting that together. It was I think it was great. So thank you. I appreciate you doing that on behalf of the council. Thank you.
Thank you
All right,
guys
moving
for
back.
doing
All right, moving back onto our agenda, we're going back to 4C, our ombudsperson's report. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you. This is Shannon Jacobino, the DDS ombudsperson. I sent the report out last week and it was sent out again this week. So I hope everyone had enough time to take a look at it. I usually ask people if you have anything you want me to discuss during the meeting to let me know beforehand so I can be prepared, but I'm certainly willing to answer any questions anyone might have. Adrian did reach out to me because she noted that there were on my report 4 incidences where I had worked with families around issues around abuse and neglect. And so I thought what I would do is go over those 4 things and just sort of let you know at a very broad level what happened and how things were handled and see if anybody had any questions. So the first one was that I was contacted by the family of an individual who lived at home with her brother, who was her guardian, her brother and his family. He's her guardian. And she had said something during a program outside the home, which led to an investigation. an abuse investigation. So she was taken into custody by DDS. And the family reached out to me, the guardians reached out to me because the investigation had been going on for over a month, and they hadn't been questioned and they hadn't heard from DDS, and they were very concerned about their loved one not understanding what was happening and feeling that the family had abandoned her. So I reached out to DDS. And we were able to get some answers as to why the investigation was taking a while. And I was also able to determine that the family could visit with their loved one. And so we were able to arrange for her to have visits. I was contacted by that family again when she was sent back home because there were actually 2 active investigations for things that had happened while she was in the custody of DDS. And so they had some questions about that. And it's, so there are 2 active investigations happening right now. And so, just in that situation, I think as in most, one of the big issues is communications. Families often don't understand what's happening. They don't know what their rights are, and they don't really know where to go to get those answers and to have someone intervene. I learned that there are times when if an individual lives in their family's home and there's an investigation, that there are times when they can still have visits with their family. So I was happy to learn that. Another call that I got was from the mom and the guardian of somebody who lives in a DDS public group home. She called because there were several open investigations. She didn't know what was happening with those investigations, and she asked me to find out. So, I reached out to the agency. We were able to find that, a couple of the investigations had been concluded. The mom did not know that she had the right to request the redacted version of the results of the investigation. So I gave her that information. She also raised some additional concerns, which led to sort of a broadening of an investigation. And so it was, again, I think often communication with families could be better, and families should probably have more information about what's going on. And they don't always know where to go to get that information. Another call that I got was from the family member of an individual who lives in a private group home. There were 2 separate incidences. One where the individual called the police and the police came to the home. There was another incident shortly after. And because the 2 incidences were very similar in nature, I felt that DDS should require or ask the provider to hire an outside investigator. DDS agreed to do that. So an outside investigator was hired, and I've maintained contact with that family because in addition to having questions about the investigation, they, were also trying to deal with the police and just needed some support through that process. And so, so I've stayed involved with them. The last one was I was contacted by DCF. A worker at a private group home had sent an anonymous letter to OSHA about allegations of abuse in the group home that she worked in. OSHA sent it to DCF. And when DCF determined that it wasn't one of their providers, they forwarded it to me. No one had made the report to DDS, so I made a report to AID, and I reached out to the region to give them a heads up about what was happening. And so those were the 4 incidents that happened. Listening to your conversation and based upon what I see is that I do think that the communication with families needs to improve. I think it would be really helpful for families to, if there's an investigation going on, to maybe get, a form, a sheet of paper that explains the process, that explains the timelines, that explains, you know, when the investigation is concluded, what information you have a right to see and how to request that information, because it needs to be requested from the regional director. I think that that would go a long way. I do know that investigations are taking longer than usual, and I think that is primarily due to the staffing crisis. You know, as you know, Kevin and Pam and Jordan said, you know, if when a provider is doing an investigation, that means that they're taking resources away from something else. And right now, most providers don't have a lot of resources. And so I do think that that's why investigations are probably taking longer than they have in the past and longer than they should. I think that's about it. I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Great, thank you. This is Kevin Zingler, Chair of the Council. Thank you, Shannon, for that report. And does any council member have any questions from either this report or last month's report for Shannon while we have her here?
Not a
Adrian.
question. Adrian Benjamin, council member. Thank you, Shannon. You know, I think obviously, having been on the council for more than a decade, I am well connected to the world of DDS, and also just because of who I am, my state legislators, my state senator. So I'm going to say this a little tongue in cheek, but when my son and I were talking about the problems we were having with the process of investigations, he said, like, aren't you like a platinum member? If this happens to you, what happens to other families? And I think these calls you're getting reflect that. People don't know. I'm impressed they know how to call an ombudsman, right? But I think that a lot of our family members are really struggling they don't know who to call, they don't have connections, and I don't have the answer to that. But I think one of my reasons for pushing this issue is not just for my personal person, but because of all of the families who don't have connections and don't really have the kind of access that we do. And, you know, I like the idea of a communication sheet about there's an investigation process, here's what it is, you know. But there's got to be, there needs to be somehow a better way. Maybe this comes down to case managers being more engaged. I don't know. But I just wanted to thank you for bringing this stuff up, and thank everybody for taking it so seriously. It means a lot. So.
Can I just respond to, this is Shannon Jacobino, the DDS ombudsperson. You know, part of the issue is that the case managers, they're not involved in the investigation. You know, just as Kevin said, he really makes sure that he's not directly involved. I think that DDS is very careful to not be heavy-handed or be involved in any way, because you don't want to affect the outcome of an investigation. And so I think there are times when, you know, I don't know that the case managers know any more than anybody else does during an investigation, you know, where things are at or what's happening. And I don't think that DDS wants to be in a position of pressuring anybody while an investigation is taking place. I have reached out to the Abuse and Investigation Division directly, though, to find out what's been going on.
Interesting.
Patty.
I just wanted to thank you, Shannon, Patty Silva, council member. You're doing a wonderful job. There's a lot of information in here, and very thorough. So just thank you for all your hard work on this and keeping us informed.
Any other questions? This is Kevin Zingler, Chair of the Council. Any other questions for Shannon Jacobino? All right, seeing none, thank you for your report as always, and thank you for your advocacy efforts on behalf of our individuals and families. And we look forward to working with you on your issues and helping and supporting each other. So Thank you again. And I apologize, I'm losing my voice. I'm trying to drink as much water as I can. So next item on our agenda is, I believe, the 4D, but we had the update with the ARPA and work groups with Jordan. So I think we can pass on that agenda. Item we had a discussion and Jordan had recommended we move it to next meeting. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to table that item to our next meeting. Moved by Pam.
Or make a motion.
Motion made to table the item to update on ARPA and work groups. I apologize, my voice.
All right, did we second it?
All right, made by Pam, seconded by Adrian. Is that how this works?
Yep. Yeah, there.
Perfect.
Sure.
Okay, for the record. There's no discussion on an item to table, so all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Chair votes aye and it passes unanimously. Moving on, the only item left on our agenda is item 4F, topics for future meetings. So I heard during the meeting, we want to have Krista Obshevsky join us and talk about the Social Security limits and asset limits. I think Christine had a question about that. We also have the abuse and neglect conversation that will be coming over, and we also have the update on the ARPA work groups, as the commissioner mentioned. Are there other items that council members would like to see on the agenda for our July 21st meeting at 4:30 p.m.? Honestly, I think that's a lot, but is there any other items that we should consider, or at least we want to tee up for future? I see Christine, go ahead.
Hi, Kevin. I think that next meeting is very packed, but I would like to see it put back on the agenda because it was put on the agenda a while back, but it kind of seemed to slide off. Was how do we work on employment incentives, getting jobs back for a lot of our population that are not working in a fulfilled situation.
Yes, I do recall that. We were going to ask Amber Burke to join us and talk about employment incentives through DDS. So I will put that on my list of items. Is there anything else that the council feels needs to be explored? And if we don't get that in July, we'll get it in September. Is that okay, Christine, or do you want it sooner?
That's fine. September's
Okay.
fine.
Okay. Just because I know we'll have a packed meeting for next month unless things shake out differently. Anything else? I see Patty raising her hand.
Yep. Patty Silva, council member. Maybe just an update on the proclamation, if we have anything to share on.
Yep. Definitely. I'll put that on my
And
agenda.
Kevin, it's Christine again. I'm sorry. As maybe a caveat to that, perhaps unless that becomes part of a sub discussion on the ARPA money.
Right.
Say that again. I apologize. You broke
If
up.
the employment incentives or finding
Yes.
employment for our population becomes part of the ARPA discussion.
Got it. Anything else before the council or topics? You're good. All right. Our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, July 21st at 4:30 p.m. It'll be via Teams. As you know, we take the month of August off and come back in September due to vacation schedules. So at this point, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Moved by Patty, seconded by Pam. Is there any further discussion on this motion to adjourn? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Chair votes aye, and we are adjourned until July 21st at 4:30 p.m. via Teams.
Have
Thanks
a good
everyone for joining us.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Kevin.
Take care.
Aye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.